covering the world of professional wrestling. This is the Signature Spot with Chris Toplack.
3, 2, 1.
Thank you very much for tuning into a new episode of the Signature Spot with Chris Toplack. If it's your first time, take off your shoes. Hope you stay a while. If you've come back again, welcome. I appreciate it. And keep telling your friends, family, and of course, fellow wrestling fans to do the same on a weekly basis. We have a jam-packed show for today. Bleacher Report's Jonathan Snowden joins me to discuss his new weekly column, Off the Top Rope, which has featured interviews with the likes of Brandi Rhodes, Douglas and Joey Janela. He's also going to be conducting a feature story on Cody. If you check out his Twitter account at J.E. Snowden, he's actually following Cody around over the past couple of days. So he is an MMA journalist pioneer, one of the most respected in that sport, and now he's covering much more pro wrestling. We also discuss his live experiences at every single AEW event. Plus, I make my full predictions for Clash of Champions this coming Sunday. Before we get to anything, I was just reading as of today, this is Wednesday, a couple of hours ago, that Triple H has said 205 Live and the Cruiserweight title will now move towards the NXT banner. This was in an interview with Newsweek. So 205 Live as a brand is no more. Here's what he had to say. NXT UK will sit under the NXT banner as well, probably 205 Live 2, breathing some life into it a little bit. That creates three distinct brands, the talent over the course of their career, which hopefully is long, where they can migrate from one to the other and be reinvigorated and have some fresh starts and have longer, more meaningful and lucrative careers while staying within the same company. You'll start to see 205 begin to sit under the NXT umbrella. I think it's always existed as an island on itself a little bit, and it's become lost in this limbo. So that's pretty exciting news. And it goes without saying that they need to fill that second hour on NXT. They're so accustomed to that 1 hour on the television tapings. Now they have 2 hours live. So to be able to draw for more talent who have performed on live television offers some critical experience. So hope you stick around for that interview with Bleacher Report's Jonathan Snowden. But first, let's get to my predictions for WWE Clash of Champions this coming Sunday.
Our topic of the week.
WWE Clash of Champions takes place this coming Sunday, September the 15th, from the Spectrum Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's Flair Country, 11 matches in total. The finals of the King of the Ring tournament have been moved to Raw the very next day, so a new king will be crowned on Raw, not here. Kickoff show, 6 p.m. in the East. Main card, 7 p.m. in the East. Let's start with the Cruiserweight Championship. Unfortunately, it is typically relegated to the kickoff show. The champion Drew Gulak versus Humberto Carrillo versus Lince Dorado. Carrillo earned this championship opportunity after defeating Oney Lorcan in a number one contenders match. From there, Lince Dorado defeated Carrillo, I believe, last week, and that's what turned this into a triple threat match. Now, Gulak, if you recall, unsuccessfully attempted to recruit Carrillo just a couple of weeks ago, actually a couple months ago. Now he faces the man he once attempted to mentor. I still believe Drew Gulak will retain and remain your Cruiserweight champion as they start appearing on the NXT brand. Next up, and again, I'm not predicting this to be the true order of the card. It's just the order that I'm going to make my predictions in. Roman Reigns, the big dog, versus Eric Rowan in a no disqualification match. It's doubtful I'm alone here, but this storyline has been unnecessarily convoluted. I mean, the twists and turns have been perplexing and not very interesting. Roman Reigns was attacked. Rowan was supposedly at the scene. Then an imposter was introduced. You remember that. They quickly wrote that off. That theory was thrown out the window, and now it appears that Eric Rowan operated alone. He also attacked Daniel Bryan, who claimed no responsibility. So either Daniel Bryan is the true puppet master, or this story will be killed off immediately. And remember, Eric Rowan, just recently on SmackDown, kept urging us to look into his eyes. I got so sick of that. I thought, are you forgetting your lines? Because you've repeated this about 3 or 4 times. My prediction here, Roman Reigns. For the Intercontinental Championship, it is Shinsuke Nakamura versus The Miz. Shinsuke Nakamura and Sami Zayn have started this newfound partnership, with Zayn occupying the role of manager or mouthpiece. Either way, Miz is one of the most successful IC champions of all time, so he's constantly a perennial contender. He always has his eyes on the prize. It also appears as though he's replacing Ali, who was previously slated for this spot, feuding with Nakamura, but then it was suddenly dropped without reason. With this alliance with Nakamura and Sami Zayn just starting to gain traction, I can't see it cut short. My prediction, Nakamura retains his Intercontinental Championship. For the SmackDown Tag Team Championship, it is the New Day, the champs, defending against the Revival, crossing brands once again. Hey, the only rules, there are no rules. With the Revival supporting Randy Orton and constantly attacking the New Day, this was a logical choice, despite the fact that, again, both teams compete on separate brands. The Revival issued the challenge. The New Day happily accepted. I predict a DQ finish maybe, but either way, the New Day retains. Whenever I go through these predictions, I stop and I realize just how many championships the WWE features on Raw and SmackDown. There's a lot. For the Women's Tag Team Championship, it is Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, two who love their caffeine, defending against Fire and Desire, the team of Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville. With Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville pinning the tag champs last week, this propelled them into the number one contender position, which makes a lot of sense. Fire and Desire have enjoyed a much longer tenure as a duo, but Bliss and Cross have become a well-oiled machine. If they do lose, you know it's going to be that big blow-up. I just don't see it happening here. My prediction, Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross retain. There's been a lot of retaining going on, but how about in the Raw Tag Division? For the Raw Tag Team Championship, it is Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman, the Odd Couple, versus Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode. This will be match one for Seth and Braun, by the way. We will get to that match between the two momentarily. These are both essentially makeshift teams. They haven't really been together long, but they have seen great success together. Seth and Braun sporadically came together to defeat Gallows and Anderson. That was during the August 19th edition of Raw to become the new tag team champions. Then Ziggler and Roode, who I'm going to go with the tandem name of Rudolph. That makes sense. I believe I heard that on the Edge and Christian podcast. I love it. It's hilarious. Earned this opportunity after winning the tag team turmoil just a couple of weeks ago on Raw. With Ziggler and Roode seemingly positioned as a more permanent unit, they would be viable champions moving forward. But this would be dependent on how long the Strowman-Rollins storyline is carried out. My prediction, Ziggler and Roode, Rudolph to become the new Raw Tag Team Champions. For the United States Championship, it is AJ Styles versus Cedric Alexander. If you hear an alarm, that's the show stealer alert. This match promises to be a potential match of the night and one to watch very closely. WWE announced Tuesday night that AJ would face Cedric Alexander for this championship. And really this transpired because Alexander scored a clean pinfall victory over AJ, and that was in the 10-man tag team match on Raw. I would love to see Cedric Alexander take that next step, but I believe AJ Styles will retain his United States Championship. Either way, Cedric Alexander is primed to win this championship in the near future. For the SmackDown Women's Championship, it is Bayley with a fresh new attitude, same theme music, same Bayley buddies versus Charlotte Flair, and she is in Flair country. This match came together during a moment of bliss featuring the two. The story is very straightforward. Charlotte believes that she is the face of the division. Bayley is not a worthy champion, but she feels like one. So those are fighting words, obviously. Charlotte successfully pinned Bayley with a natural selection on Raw in a tag team match featuring Sasha and Becky. But will it happen in Flair country? I say Bayley retains. For the record, I believe this match should headline the card. Will it? Well, that's up to WWE. For the Raw Women's Championship, it is the man, Becky Lynch, versus the boss, Sasha Banks. Sasha Banks has returned to WWE as the same boss that saw her carry the torch in NXT. And while Sasha is undeniably one of the most popular female superstars on the roster, her character is meant to be arrogant, sassy, remorseless, and cunning. That, of course, is the essence of the boss. Banks returned with a bang after she viciously attacked Natalya. Then she assaulted the man Becky Lynch with a steel chair. As you can imagine, the man wasn't particularly pleased with the scenario. So again, this match could plausibly headline the card. It's easily one of the more interesting feuds at the moment. My prediction, 2 scenarios here. I know it's a bit of a cop-out. Either a DQ finish, where Becky retains, or Sasha Banks cheats to win to become the new Raw Women's Champion. I just don't see her losing after making such an impactful return. It would just be so lackluster, right? For the WWE Championship, it is Kofi Kingston versus Randy Orton. These two squared off at SummerSlam, but the match ended in a double countout, which only further drew out this feud. With the Revival supporting Orton and the New Day working as one unit, the odds are completely even here. And then recently, Kofi Kingston, he fell into the bait that the Viper set. He was attacked in the crowd, but then Kofi got the last laugh because history repeated itself. He landed the boom drop at MSG. Of course, Randy is pretty upset about that. He'll just keep calling Kofi stupid. While cards are always subject to change, something that I found very interesting, Orton and Kingston are advertised to wrestle, and this is for the title, in a triple threat match with Dolph Ziggler on the SmackDown debut episode on Fox in October. This may indicate the feud is not over as of Sunday. My prediction, Kofi retains. For the Universal Championship, it is Seth Rollins defending against the Monster Among Men, Braun Strowman. Will these two remain Raw Tag Team Champions by the time they square off one-on-one? I don't believe so, but wouldn't be shocked if they retain either. The narrative behind this story has been Strowman's obsession with Seth's championship, and despite an alliance, the Monster Among Men simply cannot keep his eyes off the prize. Seth's saying, look away, stop it, focus, come on. Braun challenges Rollins, and then they have a failed contract signing attempt. Stone Cold Steve Austin says, hey, Michael Cole, you're not going to get the job done. I will. He helped moderate. They chugged a couple of beers. They got the deal done. And while AJ and the OC have been preoccupied, I do sense they'll play more of a factor in the tag match. If they do get involved, it will directly impact Braun. My prediction, Seth Rollins retains. Plus, WWE is already advertising Rollins versus The Fiend in Canada, specifically Edmonton as well. Again, cards are always subject to change, but that's pretty telling as well, too. So those are my predictions for WWE Clash of Champions this coming Sunday. My next guest's long list of impressive accomplishments could potentially take up half of the show, so I'll do my best to summarize. Jonathan Snowden is an MMA journalist pioneer who acts as a senior writer for Bleacher Report. He's also been seen on CNN.com. Jonathan is also a best-selling author. He's penned 3 books and is currently working on a 4th. There will be a biography on Ken Shamrock, who has made his way back to wrestling. Currently, he is focusing much more attention on the world of professional wrestling, as seen on Bleacher Report with his weekly column titled Off the Top Rope, which has already featured interviews with Brandi Rhodes, Shane Douglas, and Joey Janela. And of course, as he alluded to, he's working on a feature story on Cody. Jonathan also hosts a podcast with his wife titled Illegal Tag Team. You can also follow him on Twitter at J.E. Snowden. Let's get to the conversation.
And now, our featured guest.
So I just went through your long list of accomplishments, Jonathan, prior to having you on here. I have followed your work for years. It never ceases to amaze me. What has been your favorite part so far? Has it been writing the articles, the best-selling books, or maybe media like radio, television, podcasting? What has been your favorite?
Wow, favorite is tough because a lot of my favorite things are experiences, and they're not necessarily tied to the work as it ends up on the page. For me, for the most part, it's written work. I just remember I did a long story on Diego Sanchez, the UFC fighter. And I remember he was driving me in his car to a restaurant, and he was watching one of his teammates fight on his phone. And so he's driving probably 85 miles an hour down 35-mile-an-hour streets while he's watching a fight on his phone, and he's screaming at the phone at his teammate who is like across the world in a fist fight in a cage. And I'm just hoping we're going to get there alive. And like, it's stuff like that I'll always remember. And those are kind of like my favorite moments are the ones that don't necessarily make it into the story. I think that anecdote did hit the story.
Now, humor me. Was he screaming yes, yes, yes at any point? Because not a lot of people know this on a mass basis really until Daniel Bryan exposed it, the fact that he actually got the yes chance from him all those years ago.
Yeah, for sure. Like Diego is definitely the originator of the yes chant, and he's just such an incredible character. Unfortunately, I think his teammate was losing the fight, so it wasn't particularly positive. That might be why he was so animated. But Diego Sanchez is like, just like you see him on TV, like that's what he's like all the time. And so like it's not really an act. He really is that guy. Yeah. So. Yeah, that was an eye-opening experience. But yeah, there are so many connections like that between the worlds of MMA and professional wrestling. They are pretty closely aligned.
So speaking of MMA, I became aware of your work years ago as an MMA journalist. And I was a big fan of your work. I told you this. We've followed each other for years on Twitter, and being very transparent, there were really only a handful of journalists that I followed covering MMA that I really trusted. You were one of them. But you've scaled back on MMA. And what really led to that? Because I know now you're focusing more weekly, and we'll get to this momentarily, on pro wrestling.
Yeah, so there's as you know, the MMA space is ever changing.
Yes.
And it varies so much year to year. And UFC has kind of cornered the market in a big way. So it's very difficult for me writing for a mainstream sports site like Bleacher Report. It's mostly geared for regular sports fans. So it's very difficult for me to sell stories on the smaller fight promotions. There's just not a lot of interest there. So it's mostly UFC based. And unfortunately, most UFC cards these days are kind of also filled with fighters that regular fans don't know. And so, there's only a couple of really big events every year is kind of how the sport's gone. It's kind of transitioning slowly but surely into a boxing model where there's just these big mega fights. And then there's just a bunch of stuff in between that's really just for the hardcore fans. And so, long story short, it may be too late for that, but my audience is kind of targeted towards these big fights, and there's fewer and fewer of them. And so, it basically for me to keep working in this business, I had to look for another path and another place that I could tell stories. And it just so happened that as MMA kind of is losing a little bit of popularity with mainstream fans, professional wrestling is in a growth period. And I think we're about to hit a boom period for pro wrestling. So for me, at least, that timing has worked out well.
Oh, you're definitely bang on the money. I remember vividly watching the monthly pay-per-views for UFC and then tapering off and realizing, hey, it's just whenever Conor fights or, of course, the next big thing, right? But now you have, of course, pro wrestling. So similar to with Pride being swallowed, WCW, ECW were swallowed, but now, of course, we have AEW. And if I recall from your timeline, I believe you have attended every single AEW show to date with your family. Could you tell me a little bit more about your live experiences?
Yeah, so it's just been so much fun. So we went to the first proper AEW card. It was called Double or Nothing. It was in Las Vegas, and so we all went to Las Vegas, and that was kind of a bit of a gamble.
It was
we
two young kids, right?
We didn't know how it was. Yeah, so we have two kids. Both of our kids are special needs. They both have autism, so it's a kind of a different kind of experience. And so you don't really necessarily know how it's going to go. It's always a roll of the dice. And one of the things that really impressed us, we went to this AEW show in Las Vegas, and they had partnered with a group called Culture City, which is a sensory inclusion group that is really kind of geared for people with autism and similar issues. And they create these rooms where we could take our kids, like during the height of the excitement of the wrestling show. It was a place where they could wind down and calm down and kind of chill out for a minute. And the fact that they had this was just mind blowing. And so it created such a great experience for our family in particular on top of the excellent wrestling, which was so much fun. But beyond that, it was, they had taken the time to care about families like ours. Like that doesn't happen every day. And so it kind of like, it created an immediate loyalty with me as a customer and as a fan and as a person. And so, from that moment, we were just kind of like, these people are with us and we're with them. That was kind of the feeling. And I think that more broadly, not just for people who have kids with autism and need a sensory room, but also just that's the feeling they're kind of trying to create generally with wrestling fans who feel like they're not being heard by WWE. They're not getting the kind of wrestling they grew up on or the kind of wrestling they want to see or that they feel is possible. And so AEW is kind of holding their arms out and grabbing us all in a big hug. That's kind of how it feels to go to one of these events. So it's, I could talk for days. It's just been such a great experience.
And it's great, too, that you brought this up with Brandi. And you even brought up your own personal experiences with this, which she was very grateful and thankful that you brought that up too, because you think not just about that, but also PTSD, individuals that may be, in a tough scenario, like where do I go? What do I do? But they actually feel this inclusion. And like you mentioned, this camaraderie and this togetherness at the show where they are not left on the sidelines.
Yeah. I mean, and I wanted to tell Brandi because, who would, a lot of times you get these celebrities and wrestlers, like so much of their interactions with people like on social media, it seems to like a lot of it is positive, but there's also a lot of negative stuff. And maybe sometimes it feels like when you look at a celebrity's timeline, you can feel them being overwhelmed by the negative energy sometimes. And so I thought Brandi had done this great thing by partnering with this group, Culture City, and showing so much caring that I just wanted to, if no one else ever had, I wanted to at least let her know that, hey, this is helping people in real life. And if no one's ever told you thank you, I was, graced with this opportunity to speak with you in person. And I didn't want to let that moment go by without, I don't normally put myself personally into the stories, but I didn't want to let the moment pass by and not have the opportunity to say thanks because they're doing such a cool thing for us.
You're right. And I think there was a point in time where you knew that if this ever transpired, you'd have to do that, right? Because then at least she sees this is actually positively impacting people as well, too, because that's the hope, of course, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important. So a lot of times, we're very willing to tell people when we think they've messed up and they've made a mistake. It's easy to pile onto like a list of 100 other people saying, hey, you did something bad. Like the person doesn't know they did something bad, right? Yeah. But much less often is, you get the message that says, hey, I really appreciate what you're doing. You did a great job. I read that story in my case, and I really liked it. Like just those little positive messages can mean so much to a person who creates something. I'm sure it's the same for you. If someone listens to the podcast and says, you know what, that was really good. I'm going to subscribe to it. I'm going to listen to it. I heard the last one. Like just that little message, just one, like can give you the power to continue on and be like, okay, like I'm going to keep doing this. This is, people are enjoying this. And a lot of times you're kind of left out there in the wilderness, just wondering like, does anyone like this? Is anyone reading it? Does anyone pay attention? Like, you don't really know. You can see the numbers on the screen, but you don't really know if it's impacting anyone. So just, I try to be cognizant of that and let other people know that I appreciate what they do.
I should note, I really noticed that on your Twitter account as well, too. There's this level of humbleness. And I could tell you personally, that hit me like a ton of bricks when I was in my early 20s. I was having a great run in radio. They were saying, hey, ratings are going up. I didn't know who it impacted because you don't know who's listening on the other side until eventually you hear those stories and you realize I really am a freedom from concern for people. And that's been my goal the entire time. So once you start hearing those stories, such as Brandi, you start to realize, wow, I'm really actually doing something special here.
Yeah, and it's so cool because you don't always hear positive stories about wrestling. A lot of times it feels like
the detractors, right? The people that are saying, let's pick apart everything they did wrong. Let's tell 1,000 people. Let's tell one what they did right.
Yes, and I just want to kind of be the positive voice as much as I can to say, yeah, I mean, I have some of the same problems with the booking on WWE Raw, and I noticed some of the same things that other people do. But I think that my time is spent more valuably saying, hey, here's this other thing that I enjoyed. You might enjoy it too, and kind of focus it in that direction. And as opposed to being just another voice saying, "Oh, this bad thing was bad," and I don't like that Jinder Mahal is the champion of WWE. The kind of things that people just kind of pile onto.
Yeah.
I kind of try to look at it the other way and look at like, what am I liking about this, and what can I share with other people? And so that's kind of been my goal as I've moved into wrestling.
Yeah, you're bang on. I mean, and that makes sense too. I mean, here's a great example. Look at something like Firefly Funhouse. First week, everybody wrote it off. Now it is arguably the hottest thing in pro wrestling with The Fiend. And all of a sudden, people are saying, I guess I should have gave it time. And that's exactly what I told individuals who followed my show. I said, give it time. Do not pass judgment. It is one layer in the story. There are many layers left.
And it's wildly entertaining. So, I do like to give them a little bit of leeway to see what they're going to do with a story or an angle or a performer or even a match. You have to give it some time to see what the creator's intent is. To say something is bad after week one, it's maybe too early, because you don't really, like you say, you don't really know where it's heading. And when you have a performer as talented as Bray Wyatt, aka The Fiend, you've got to give him that leeway to see what he's going to do, because I bet 9 times out of 10 it's going to be something interesting.
Speaking of positivity, you noted on Twitter that Cody Rhodes has something special in terms of the way he controls a crowd. I saw this in Legacy years ago. I remember everybody saying, Teddy's the guy, Ted DiBiase Jr., and I was actually debating, no, it's Cody, not just the genes, but he has something in him. Again, it's that emotive standpoint, right? You saw it in the crowd. You posted that infamous photo. Not sure if you found the person who you could source it to, right? But who else do you currently see in pro wrestling who possesses those same abilities to really control the crowd the way he does?
I mean, I think that he's pretty singular, at least in American wrestling right now, in just the way that he has an emotional attachment. And part of that is the power of the social media. And that's really how they've grown their entire brand, but also like how he has created this personal connection between him and the audience. Like, we feel like we know Cody as a person. We know his wife, Brandi. We know his dog, Pharaoh. We know his life. They've shared their life with us. And so when he comes out for a wrestling match, like, we feel like we are in his corner, like we are part of the team. And they've been real smart about creating AEW. They say AEW is for everyone. That's one of their catchphrases. And so that's the feeling they try to create, which is like, it's not just Cody in there in the ring, it's all of us and what he represents. And so it's really powerful, because he's much larger than just Cody Rhodes. As great a performer as Cody Rhodes is, he's representing all of the wrestling fans who are hoping wrestling can be something more than it is right now. He's the representative for all of us, and that's the power that he brings when he walks out to the ring, and when he steps in front of the crowd and he holds his arms out like he did in the middle of that match. And it was like he was a religious figure almost. Like it was really something special. And so it's not something that you see all the time. And I do see something, a potential brewing on the opposite direction, a person that I've seen on the independent scene control a crowd, but in the negative direction. And that's Cody's best friend, MJF. Who has the same kind of natural energy, only to draw in negative responses. So it's eventually, I think that's going to be a pretty interesting dynamic.
I love how they are not rushing that story either. They threw a little red herring at us, right? They had him holding the chair, and I thought, they are not going to let this happen for months. I would not let it happen for about 6 months. Let it build, let it fester, have other storylines and opponents and feuds take place, then have that big blow off maybe next year sometime.
Yeah, I think it'll mean a lot more once we are more fully invested in the relationship between Cody and MJF. Like right now, if it happened in that, and they did tease it very smartly, right? MJF knew exactly what he was doing, holding that chair a beat too long behind Cody. He knew what everyone was thinking. But, if it had happened right now, it would have just felt like one of 100,000 other wrestling angles you've seen, where like the people become best friends in like a week or two, and then all of a sudden one of them turns, and you see that routinely on WWE TV and everywhere. I'm not picking on WWE; they just happen to be the wrestling program right now. But we've seen that story a million times, like friends turning on each other, and normally the reason they don't work is because you haven't sufficiently built up the friendship so that I care about it. And so I'm sure that these guys are smart enough to understand that, and they're going to let it, like you say, fester and build up and give us this emotional attachment before they tear it apart. That'll be what creates the heat and the energy.
So congratulations, by the way. I noted this before we jumped on microphone here. Your wrestling column, Off the Top Rope, available every single Thursday on Bleacher Report. You had a couple bangers for your first two. You had Brandi Rhodes on there. 2 articles prominently featured on the site, but also Shane Douglas as well. And I actually learned something new, that when he threw the championship in the garbage, Todd Gordon knew about it. Shane Douglas knew about it. Paul Heyman knew about it. I guess at the time, and his name escapes me, the NWA president, I think, was so hot about this. And then Paul worked it into an angle. That's gold.
Yeah. So yeah, Paul Heyman is a genius. I've said that for a long time. And, occasionally I'll be blessed with a phone call from Paul and get to talk to him a little bit.
Wow.
So, I'm a huge admirer of him. And so it's definitely, they had done something unkind to this man. Dennis Coralluzzo is his name. And, they had basically trashed his title, and they were going to go in a different direction. But, Paul was smart enough and nefarious enough to turn it into an angle for his television, and it kind of took the heat off in the moment because Dennis thought it was an angle, and that Shane Douglas would come back as NWA champion, and this would all be something that would be worked out in wrestling terms. Instead, of course, it ended up being real life. They created ECW instead, and the rest is kind of history.
So I don't want you to spoil anything for me, because I am also a fan and I love surprises. But if you had some dream interviews lined up, who would they be and why?
It just so happens that I do have some dream interviews lined up.
Oh, boy.
And I don't know if I can reveal it next.
I don't even know if I want you to, right? I actually kind of like the anticipation now.
So the big thing that I do, so I'm writing this weekly wrestling column, and that's a lot of fun. But that's not kind of how I've made my living in this space. For the last probably 5 years or so, I've mostly been a features writer, writing these big profiles. So what I'll do is I will go out and, for example, I did one on the MMA trainer Greg Jackson. He's a famous coach of a lot of great fighters, to include like John Jones, the UFC light heavyweight champion.
GSP as well.
Sure. And like we talked about Diego Sanchez, Holly Holm, the list can go on and on. So Greg is kind of considered the great MMA coach. So I went out to Albuquerque, where he has his gym, and I stayed there, and I met Greg, and he and I went out in his truck and hunted for ghost towns. And so the idea is that I'm getting to know this person, what they're really all about, and trying to tell their true story. And so, that takes some time. So these are kind of the big stories I've been doing for the last few years, mostly in MMA, some in boxing. And now I'm going to get my shot at doing my first one for pro wrestling in a long time. So I'm really excited about that. I can say it's with a famous AEW wrestler. It might be a famous AEW wrestler that we've already talked about on the podcast.
Oh, okay.
So I'm really excited about this story. I'll be really getting a chance to dig in on a story, and not just do a lot of times the interviews that you do are 10 or 15 minutes on the phone, and they're nice, but they're phone interviews. This will be a little bit different, and I'll go and meet the person and kind of see what their life is like a little bit. And so I'm really excited about that. But I mean, I'm such a fan that I'm excited about all these things. I think I can reveal for my next column, I'm going to talk to Joey Janela, for example.
He's a bad boy, right?
He's a bad boy. So, just those kind of interviews are also really cool. And I try to approach them a little differently than some of the other wrestling interviews I've seen. and try to sneak in some questions to make us all smarter about how the industry works. Like, what is it like to be a pro wrestler? How do you do this? How do you create the art? What goes through your mind when you do a match where you go through a Cracker Barrel? Like, there's a lot to ask that beyond just like, who's your buddy in the locker room and how long is your contract for? Like, there are a lot of things that are interesting to me, and I hope they're interesting to other people, and that's kind of the whole reason I'm doing this wrestling column.
Joey, I want you to blur the line. How often do you really eat a Cracker Barrel? I want you to reveal it to me. Tell me the truth, man. You fought your ass off. I need to know. Do you actually eat there?
I'll ask him what he's had a Cracker Barrel, and then I'll know whether he's actually been there or not, because I have been to Cracker Barrel.
Yes.
Being from the Deep South, obviously I'm intimately familiar with it.
If he says the breadsticks, he's talking about Olive Garden, because it's the biscuits all day at Cracker Barrel.
That's right. He's lying. So yeah, we'll get to the bottom of it. Now that you've mentioned that, I'll ask him about it.
Ooh, one final question for you. I really enjoyed the podcast with your wife Christina, a legal tag team. Are you going to continue with that? It's a fun dynamic, a very different perspective, especially when you were covering the G1 Classic. It was amazing.
Yeah, so we do the podcast is kind of it's become a thing that some people actually listen to, which is fun. We just kind of did it because we were already sitting down and talking about wrestling. So and I had these microphones here, so I said, why don't we just record this? Yeah, so it has been a lot of fun. We will continue it. So we don't really have all the best practices for doing a podcast are like, you got to do it on exactly the same day every week and release it at the same time and be consistent with it. And, we don't do any of that, which maybe is why we're not as successful as we could be. But, the basic thing is that we do it when we have time and when we feel like it. So I don't ever want to do one where it's just like, we feel like, we've got to do one because we've got to do one. Like we want to do it when we have something that we feel really strong about. And so it just so happens we're going to do one later on tonight, talking about All Out. So
that's exciting. And your live experience, which I'm going to be tuning into because it's very unique when you're actually there in person to feel that entire adrenaline. I watched it on television, of course, and I reviewed it. Much different behind the screen, though.
Yeah, and it's really difficult to compare them sometimes. Like, I've just had to come to the realization that like the matches that you're seeing from your seat in an arena, it's just a different match than someone is seeing on television. And, they have a lot of similarities, obviously, because the same things are happening. But, you're seeing it differently. You don't have the soundtrack of the announcers. On TV, you're seeing it from some specific angle that they've chosen for you. In real life, you're seeing whatever you want to look at. Maybe someone's making a commotion in the crowd. Maybe Tully Blanchard is doing something on the outside that the camera doesn't pick up, but you pick up. Like, the experience is just different. And then, of course, there's the power of the crowd. And you can just, when a crowd is really into a wrestling match, you can feel that. Like, it's almost tangible. Like, it's in the air. And so I think it's only natural that when you're live at an event, you're going to like it more than someone sitting at home almost always. That's just how it works.
Especially in a great pro wrestling city as well, too, like Chicago, or when I was in Toronto for SummerSlam and NXT, or, of course, with Full Gear in Baltimore, all historically great wrestling towns.
Yeah, I mean, that it's Chicago. I've been there several times this year for wrestling shows, of various kinds. And I did a profile of Jim Ross back in the day and ended up at an NXT takeover event in Chicago. That was my first real experience with NXT, and the energy there was tremendous too. So yeah, I think that right now in the U.S., Chicago is the wrestling city. Like, there's the most energy in Chicago. Their shows are popping up all the time. And it's a great place. Like, it's sort of centrally located so that fans all over the Midwest can kind of pop in there for these big events. And so it's just worked out to being a great place to go check out a show.
His wrestling column, Off the Top Rope, is available every single Thursday on BleacherReport.com. He's Jonathan Snowden. You can follow him on Twitter, J.E. Snowden. Thank you very much, my friend, for joining me. It's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to The Signature Spot with Chris Toplack.
A real pleasure to chat with Jonathan Snowden. I mean it when I say it. I'm a huge fan of his work, so check out his column every single Thursday, Off the Top Rope. As he alluded to, and he's posted this on his Twitter account, he is working on a big feature story on Cody. Cannot wait to see that one. So next week, I'm going to focus on NXT and, of course, that debut episode on USA Network. But I do have one gripe. I have no idea where it's going to air. Now, Raw and SmackDown both air on Sportsnet 360, but there's been no formal announcement, no advertising, and there's nothing on the schedule that would indicate that NXT is a lock. And we're a week away, so they're cutting it mighty close. So the good news is it will be live for 2 hours on the USA Network. The bad news is for us in the Great White North, we may be relegated to watching it the next day on the WWE Network. And as for AEW, they still haven't announced their home in Canada, but I have heard that is coming soon. My prediction is TSN. Either way, I look forward to Wednesdays. It's my favorite day of the week when it comes to pro wrestling because I get caught up on both NXT brands. I also record my podcast on Wednesday, so I may have to shuffle some things around during the week because, wow, Wednesdays are going to become very, very busy, but I am so totally excited. So thank you for tuning into the predictions and also great conversation with Jonathan Snowden. Hope to have him back soon. So if you would be so kind, follow me all over social media on whatever platform you listen to this program on. Give me a 5-star review. It helps spread the word, helps build some much needed cred because it's growing on a weekly basis, and that is all thanks to you. So keep telling your friends, family, and fellow wrestling fans to tune in on a weekly basis. We'll chat again next week, and until then, happy trails to you. Until we meet again.
This concludes another episode of The Signature Spot with Chris Toplack. For new episodes, subscribe on YouTube, Stitcher, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, or iTunes. And don't forget to follow The Signature Spot on Facebook for exclusive clips, polls, and opinions.
In spite of